So I'm still trying things out on this channel, playing around with format and structure, etc., and doing videos from all different periods in history, still trying to find my voice a bit, you know. They say you have to do something for 10,000 hours before you're good at it, so still a long way to go. Anyway, I thought I'd have a crack at a reaction video. Seems like it's a tried and tested way to expand one's audience, by which I mean pilfer subs. I thought I'd put a twist on it though. Okay, so you ready for your mind to be turned to gravy right now? I'm going to do a reaction to a reaction video. I'm going to go full meta, full Inception mode, 2 tiers of reaction. So the original video on Henry VIII is by a massive channel called Oversimplified. They're a juggernaut, millions of views, millions of subs, and they're one of the very best to do what they do. You know, fairly short animated videos introducing the subject, perfect for kids or if you don't know anything about the topic. So that's the original piece of work. But then there's Mr. Terry History, a reaction channel, among other things. And Mr. Terry is an American history teacher with over 200,000 subs who, you know, does reactions and a bit of gaming and things. And he's well all right, I think. His heart is 100% in the right place, I reckon. Just a dude who wants to spread the wonders of history as far and as wide as he can. Laudable. Although I do have to immediately address the elephant in the room. Mr. Terry appears to be wearing an Arsenal top. Not quite sure why you've got that on, mate. I'm triggered. No, I'm only mucking about. At least it wasn't a Tottenham shirt. I would have had to throw my monitor across the room. Anyway, Mr. Terry watches Oversimplified's video and chimes in with comments every now and again, and I'll react to them both. Add a bit more depth if I can, where the Oversimplified boys have scratched the surface, and Mr. Terry has turned it into a divot. I'm going to try and turn it into a full-blown furrow, hopefully flesh out some of the things that they may have omitted. Alright, so first of all, I'll just let Mr. Terry do his introduction in full. It's only fair, and I'll put the links below this video too. Alright, here we go.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge.
Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video of Mr. Terry as I continue my search for historical knowledge found here on the internet. Alright, today's video comes from the deservedly famous, awesome history channel, Oversimplified. And it looks like they just did a video on Henry VIII, who is a character you can make a lot of jokes about. And you'll probably see why if you don't know. He was the famous former king of England that left, broke away from the Catholic Church as the Pope refused to annul his marriage to his wife, who he wanted to leave because he wanted to remarry to someone that would, at least in his mind, be more likely to produce him a male heir. Because that's always important for a king to do. So a lot of jokes I think you can make here. Should be very informative, very funny if we know Oversimplified, and they've been doing it for now years. All right, link to the original video is down below. Make sure you go ahead and click that. Give them a like, a view, a subscribe. Highly recommended if for some crazy reason you have not been following this channel. And if you haven't subbed to my channel, you like to follow around me, a history teacher that goes through a lot of history videos on the internet, tries to give some context, give some commentary when it needs to be, and just promoting history education in general. Love to have you be around our community, as well as join our Discord server, link down below. One other final thing I thought you might be interested in is we just launched a new Teespring campaign. You might be able to see the products down below the video. We just launched a Mario Kart themed World War II design that I think you might really like. So definitely check it out. You might be able to see some direct links down below the video or go to the description to the Teespring and you can check that out too. All right, let's go ahead and get started.
Blah. Sigmund, I don't have much longer. Tell me, was I a good king? You were okay. Will I be remembered as the great warrior king who invaded France,
Nope.
revolutionized English healthcare,
Nope.
and developed great parklands?
Nope.
Probably not.
Nope. He's just getting married for killing all his wives.
Because of the wife killings? Because of the wife killings. Blah. Blah. Sigmund, how did I get here? I still remember the good old days when I was a boy with a heart full of fire. And Mummy would teach me.
Flashback.
Okay, Henry, this...
Wait, I want to look at his toys. He's got some Power Rangers, some Ninja Turtles. He's got an Etch-a-Sketch back here, his Razor scooter, his hoverboard, like a hoverboard from Back to the Future. We got a Mr. Potato Head, Bop It, fidget spinner, some other dolls. Dude, great childhood.
Is a horse. Can you say horse? Divorce. What? No. Okay, let's try this one. Can you say loaf of bread? Loaf with her head. No, Henry, that's wrong. You know what? Last one. Okay. Can you say soap? Soap. Yes, that's it. I'm the supreme head of the church. Screw the Pope. You know what? You're my son and I love you, but you're freaking weird, man.
Awesome. They basically nailed all of his stereotypes right there. Taking control of the church and, divorcing his wife. And before he went into his dream, he ate the whole pig. He was known for being very overweight.
So here, neither Oversimplified nor Mr. Terry go into any detail about Henry's mum. I thought it might be worth spending a couple of minutes on her because she was a fascinating figure. She had a crazy, torrid life. She only barely survived the Wars of the Roses. So her dad was King Edward IV, the sun in splendour. Her uncle was Richard III, this son of York.
Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York.
Her two brothers were those two princes in the tower that disappeared, were murdered. And she was walking a tightrope for most of her young life. But then, because she survived, she was like a golden ticket, like the last way that the houses of York and Lancaster could be united in marriage, and thus end the Wars of the Roses. And that's exactly what happened. After Henry Tudor won at Bosworth Field in 1485, he marries Elizabeth of York, and boom, those children are both Lancastrian and Yorkist. Problem solved. Sort of.
The year is 1491. England has just come out of 3 decades of civil war, in which a bunch of Henrys, Edwards, and one Richard had a little ding-dong over which royal house should rule the realm. Finally, a Henry won.
By the way, was it the War of the Roses? Correct me if I'm wrong, it's just coming to mind. The sort of background story that Game of Thrones was inspired by. Did Martin say that when he wrote that? That just came to my mind. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yes and no, Mr. Terry. Yes and no. George R.R. Martin has said a few times that he picks and chooses things from throughout history and makes them his own. The houses of Stark and Lannister are based loosely on York and Lancaster. I'll let George speak for himself.
So history, was huge for me. And as I read a lot of history, there's that famous quote that if you steal from one person it's plagiarism, if you steal from many people it's research. I stole from many people reading a lot of history, and I would say to my wife as I read some of these histories, you can't make this stuff up. Listen to what happened here. And I'd read some incredible incident, and then, I'd file off the serial numbers and change a few things and do a version of that for my books. So something like The Red Wedding, as I've said in other interviews, was very much inspired by the Black Dinner of Scotland and the Glencoe Massacre, both from Scotland. Scotland has a lot of incredibly bloody history, which is particularly good. Of course, the War of the Roses was a huge influence over everything, the Hundreds Years' War. All of that was grist for the mill.
Henry VII, and he had a son. What should we name him? My royal lineage is full of Henrys. A fine name, a vigorous name, a tenacious name, a muscular name. How about Arthur? And so Arthur, Prince of Wales and next in line to the throne, was born. 5 years later, Prince Henry was born, but nobody cares about him. He's not the heir, just a spare. The king wanted to make an alliance with Spain.
How does he become heir?
So one day, he said to his son Arthur, "Hey, baby, you see that lady baby? That's gonna be your wife. But father, I'm not even 3 years old yet. Listen, there's something you have to understand. You're my son. But more than that, you're a political bargaining tool.
Yep.
But you love me, right? I love you as a political bargaining tool. Yay. Hey, Pop, who the heck are you? I've written you a poem. Listen here, tiny man. Can't you see that I'm busy? But I'm your son. I have another son? As Arthur was in another palace.
because you want context, right? Very, very common in especially feudal kind of cultures where kingdoms would marry their children into other kingdoms, and that would create alliances between kingdoms. So often the idea of marriage is, something very different than what people would consider today. Can I go play Fortnite now? Let's go back 5
See
seconds.
that I'm busy.
Some places in the world, arranged child marriages still go on today, I'm afraid to say.
Busy, but I'm your son. I have another son? As Arthur was in another palace, being prepped to become king, Henry lived with his mother and 2 sisters.
Oh, I just noticed the Game Boy. Another game. I had that exact same Game Boy, the green one. Oh yeah, I bought it just so I could play Pokemon Yellow when it came out.
No way, I had Pokemon Yellow too. Mr. Terry, a man of impeccable taste. Only the coolest kids had Pokemon Yellow.
Eltham, where he was being trained for a church career. And not just that, Henry learnt languages. He played sports.
Yaldav?
Being trained for a church career. And not just that, Henry learnt languages.
Wait.
Eltham,
I gotta
where
see
he
it
was
over time.
being
How did he
trained
spell
for a
this?
church career. And not just that, Henry learnt
Yaldav, like, hey, Yaldav, what's the context here? Yaldav, y'all should've, Yaldav?
languages. He played sports.
Oh,
He
you
learnt the recorder. What a nerd. Am I right? Wrong. Henry was the coolest kid around. So I told my Latin teacher he could kissius my buddius. Anyway, here's Wonderwall.
That's actually quite
Great
funny.
scholars and
Wonderwall. What a shame that song has almost been memed, but it is so good. Oasis, Wonderwall. It's also the song that if you learn any instrument, especially guitar, you're gonna learn how to play. If you haven't heard it, go look it up. You'll know Wonderwall.
Yeah, I know about 4 songs on guitar, and they're all 3 called Oasis songs, and one of them is Wonderwall.
theologians from across Europe came to meet and teach the young Prince Henry, who by all accounts was a very enlightened, bright, and charming young boy. Everybody loved Henry, and out of everything Henry was taught,
Except the Enlightenment hasn't happened yet, if that's what they're referring to. Has not happened yet.
more than anything, he came to adore and respect theology and Catholicism. One of Henry's tutors was English poet laureate John Skelton, who wrote a textbook for Henry that we still have today. In it, he wrote a number of important lessons for the young prince, such as, do not be mean, loathe gluttony, and do not violate widows.
Terry's face.
Check failed. Check failed. Check failed.
Yep,
Important
calling it
lessons
right.
for any 9-year-old boy. Around this time, Henry's older brother Arthur, now 15 years old, was married to Catherine of Aragon, sealing the union between England and Spain.
I like like the total suburbia backyard wedding that's going on there. You got like your neighbors' houses in the back and the yard with the wood what do you call those types of fences? Yeah, the wood slab fences.
And then he died.
Oh,
Oh, my alliance with Spain. My poor alliance with Spain.
Aragon was a kingdom in Spain. That's what they're referring to there.
And your son, sire? Oh, yes, of course, my son. But mostly my alliance with Spain. Hey, Pop, who the heck are you? Oh, yeah! And just like that, an unprepared Prince Henry was now the new heir to the throne.
We call that failing upwards.
I'll just interject here, as it's not mentioned again going forward, but the death of Henry's older brother Arthur caused some deep-seated issues, it seems, in Henry's mind. Like he was haunted by him in some ways, or was forever in his shadow, even in death. There's a great bit in Wolf Hall when Henry, as a middle-aged man, has a nightmare about Arthur in the middle of the night, and has to call for Thomas Cromwell to talk him down. And I think that did actually happen in real life, so Henry and the whole family really were pretty badly scarred by the death of that Arthur. Just thought it was worth stressing that a bit.
And how about that alliance with Spain? Well, the solution was simple. Hey, boy, see that full-grown woman over there? That's gonna be your wife. What, my brother's widow? Yes. You're a freaking weirdo, man. Now, in the Bible,
Now
there's
we're
a
getting
verse that says marrying your brother's widow, that's a big no-no.
Ah,
So the king
Leviticus,
needed
of
to
course.
convince the Pope and get his special permission. Hey, can I please have my son marry his brother's widow? Sure, why not? And
Okay, I did not know this story. Because I do know with Henry actually had a pretty good relationship before with the Pope. And hopefully they talk about the Reformation, and I'll try to pop that in later because he defended sort of the spread of the Reformation from England, from happening from mainland Europe into England, which was, new churches being created. This whole rise of Henry is right within that. People like Martin Luther and stuff like that, and trying to keep that from happening in England, which, again, I think it's the Defender of the Faith title that the Pope gave him. So they actually had a good relationship. But I didn't know this before, that you actually had to get some kind of biblical permission to marry your brother's widow. Interesting to see all that happen, huh? All right, let's continue.
And so it was. Henry's life was turned on its head as he was moved to the royal court, next in line to the throne. But tragedy struck when just a few months later, his mother, with whom he was very close, suddenly died in childbirth. The loss of his mother almost certainly had a big effect on the young boy.
Again, nothing more is said about that, but I think it's worth emphasising a little. You know, it's easy just to say these things or read a line in a book. But the real reality of deaths in the close family can be devastating. It seems Henry missed her terribly.
In his older years, King Henry VII went on a bit of a paranoid trip. As was normal for a king at the time, Henry VII had to quell a number of rebellions.
When you looked at the context of where Henry's family came up through by basically defeating these rival families, you would be paranoid all the time because there is somebody always out to get you. Always. So just because you're paranoid doesn't mean someone's not out to get you.
Good comment, Mr. Terry.
And as he aged, he became ever more suspicious of the nobility around him. To keep them in check, he began levying huge, ruinous fines, left, right, and center. Dukes, bishops, barons, even his own mother. No one
There's
was
a tax
safe
for
from his
that.
tyranny. And the nobility of England began to suffer. So when Henry VII finally got sick and died just after Christmas 1508, there was a lot of celebration. Not only because the tyrannical Henry VII was gone, but because his replacement was the ever-popular, charming, and handsome 18-year-old King Henry VIII.
He's king. It's time.
Henry married Catherine of Aragon
Crown's
in June
on.
1509. You may be wondering, if it's so weird to marry your brother's widow, and since he's now king,
He's
couldn't
the
Henry
creator,
just
right?
decide not to? Well, yes, he could. But by now, Henry wanted to. The thing about Henry that was unlike many kings of the time was he married for love, and he had grown quite fond of Catherine. Very fond. Historians
I don't know what's the age difference right there when they got married.
She's only about 6 years older than
say
him.
their marriage was unusually good, and so he was coronated king. And what a king. Compared to
Mine's
his
better.
tyrannical father, he was an absolute joy. Having the blood of two royal houses, he was widely supported. He was really, really ridiculously good looking, and those famous calves could achieve world peace. Hey Henry, now that you're king, you know what that means. Costume party!
I'll just do a quick quote on Henry VIII's appearance. It's from Winston Churchill's History of the English-Speaking Peoples. Yeah, that Winston Churchill. And he quotes a primary source, someone in the 16th century who saw Henry with their own eyeballs. And this is what they say. Quote, "His Majesty is the most handsome potentate I have ever set eyes on. Above the usual height, with an extremely fine calf to his leg. His complexion fair and bright, with auburn hair combed straight and short in the French fashion, and a round face so very beautiful that it would become a pretty woman." End quote. So that's obviously sycophancy, someone it's in their interest to be kind to Henry, but still you couldn't really get away with saying something like that if there wasn't some truth to it.
Henry pranced around the palace playing dress up with his friends. He wrote plays. He sang songs. He danced.
Wait.
Palace
what was that I
playing
thought it
dress
was?
up with his friends. He wrote plays. He sang.
I shall never giveth thee up. I shall never alloweth thee down. Oh, Rick Astley. Even back then, huh?
Songs. He danced. A true Renaissance man, very different from the gluttonous wife killer we think of today. In his early reign,
Renaissance was going on at this time. Renaissance, isn't really a time period. Kind of is. More like some stuff that was happening. But yeah, no, that's actually true. But Enlightenment, not yet.
So there were actually different flourishings of the Renaissance, the rebirth of classicism, in different places at different times. So yeah, it's a slightly tricky thing to pin down, to be fair.
people from near and far would come to ask favors of the generous king. Hey man, could I gain ownership of some land near Upton Snodsbury? Sure thing, pal. Hey, could I be an earl or a baron or a viscount or something? Anything you want, man. Could I get, just a really cool pig that has, freaking metal wings and 8 legs and shoots flippin' lasers and it can grow more pigs out of it for extra pigs? Say no more. Hey, guys,
Oh,
I
too many
was just
financial
checking up on the
favors.
financial report, and what the hell? We can't afford this. Henry's council.
That's how you gain favor, though. You give favors to especially powerful people. And the whole feudal era, that is where loyalty lies. I mean, loyalty is all about who takes care of you, and you pledge loyalty to those people.
Ah, feudalism. Mr. Terry mentions feudalism there. I'm being a bit nitpicky, but a lot has been written about this, and historians argue loads about it. But most agree, I think, that classic feudalism had massively declined by the age of Henry VIII. All sorts of reasons why. The Black Death, probably one of the main ones. But yeah, couldn't have feudalism mentioned and not pipe up there.
So that he inherited from his father weren't happy with all the money he was just throwing around, and they worked hard to curb the king's spending. Since they controlled the royal seals needed to get stuff done, at first they were largely able to control the young king. And for Henry, the most infuriating things of all was they wouldn't let him joust with his friends because it was too dangerous, nor would they let him do the thing he wanted most, to go on a great, glorious, and expensive conquest against England's historic enemy, France.
Oh, that rivalry. It just never ends, huh?
Oh, the vasty fields of brother France, where the previous lions of Henry's blood had unfurled their bloody flag. Ah, yes. I remember.
Please, guys, I'll keep it cheap. How? I'm glad you asked. I've got a promo code. For the financial burden of war? Yes. Honey is the free browser extension.
Oh, I'm just going to skip through Oversimplified's advert for the browser extension Honey. For some reason, Mr. Terry sits through it in real time, but I'm just going to fast forward it here.
Now, where were we?
Cool.
Oh yeah. Sexy calves, excessive spending, and war with France. Henry wanted glory. He wanted to go down in history. If he didn't go to war in France, was he even the King of England? Man, I want to go to war so bad.
It's the definition of an English king. Invade France, but usually fail at this point.
Fair comment.
But the council won't let me.
In history.
Hey, maybe I can help with that. Whoa, it's Cardinal Wolsey, one of my best friends. Despite being an old-ass man, Cardinal Wolsey knew that if he helped King Henry, there'd likely be something in it for him. So what was his great, intricate plan to curb the council's power? You're the king, dum-dum. You can do whatever you want. What? Wolsey began writing bills that...
He just found out he's actually way more powerful than he could be. Or than more powerful than he thought he was.
Again, I think it's worth pausing just for a moment here, because in some ways this is the very crux of the matter. It's the reason why Henry VIII towers over history, more so even than having all those wives and killing some of them. It's the fact that Henry eventually, anyway, we're not quite there yet, but eventually became truly autonomous, answering to literally no one. In the end, not even the Bishop of Rome, Christ's vicar on earth, the Pope.
Simply didn't require the seals, and thus Henry was back on top. For his efforts, Wolsey began to climb the ranks, and he became something of a yes-man for King Henry, encouraging Henry to frolic and play while Wolsey took care of business. Hey, kid, you want to go on an adventure? Do I ever? The Pope was at war with France, and he needed some help. He offered the young, impressionable King Henry 100 Parmesan cheeses, some wine, and a golden rose if he came to the Pope's aid, and Henry was all in. At this point in his life, he still respected the church and loved the Pope.
Yeah.
Here was the chance for war he had been waiting for. He still didn't have an heir, a fairly big problem for a monarch at the time. But right now, the only kind of smashing he was interested in was smashing French guys in the face. And so off he went. The English already held the French city of Calais. From there, Henry made a glorious victory at the Battle of the Spurs. He took the French cities of Terouanne and Tournai. Word of his victories spread. This was it. Here was the glory he had been waiting for.
I've got a quote here about the Battle of the Spurs from legendary Oxford historian Professor Charles Oman. Feels a bit like bringing a Glock 19 to a bat fight, but he writes, quote, "He had not long been seated on the throne when he joined the Holy League, a confederacy formed against France by Pope Julius II, in which both those old intriguers, the Emperor Maximilian and King Ferdinand of Aragon, were already enlisted, 1511. Henry might have left them to fight their own battles for the mastery of Italy and Flanders, but he was burning to assert his power in Europe and to win military distinction. His arms were fairly fortunate. A first attack on the south of France failed, but he met with considerable success in 1513 when he landed at Calais with 25,000 men, took the towns of Tournai and Touraine, and routed the French army of the north at an engagement called the Battle of the Spurs. from which with haste the French knights urged their horses out of the fray. End quote.
Tiny
Back
little
home,
victory.
his beautiful wife also led armies to victory in Scotland.
Oh, man.
And better yet, she was...
Oh, they militarized the metal-winged pig. Smart.
Yeah, up there in Scotland, that was the Battle of Flodden. And from Professor Oman again, he says, quote, "On Flodden Field, between the Till and the Tweed, the armies met and fought a fierce and doubtful battle which lasted far into the night. Though victorious on one wing, the Scots were beaten in the centre, and their king and most of their nobles fell in a desperate struggle around the royal banner. In the darkness, the survivors of the struggle dispersed and fled home." End quote.
pregnant. Soon, Henry would have an heir. All of Henry's wildest dreams were coming true. Oh, he ran out of money. As the French prepared to invade Italy, all Henry could do was go home. Well, at least now I have an heir to cheer me up. Bring me my son. Henry, this is Mary. Mary? That's a funny name for a boy. Henry, it's a girl. This was Catherine's 5th pregnancy.
That's actually quite funny. Those boys at Oversimplified are good at what they do. Got to give it to them.
5th pregnancy. Yeah, I'd heard they just had trouble with a lot of this. So pregnancy 1 was a stillborn girl. A boy died in infancy. And then a boy is stillborn. So this is where it looks like he's saying, and people are saying that it's kind of her problem. She has some kind of issue with this.
Yeah, Catherine of Aragon's birthing record is just a string of tragedy, really.
But I mean, this girl was healthy though. So
one thing I will say though, and maybe it's just me being pedantic and Mr. Terry just meant that Mary survived, but she was far from healthy. She had a reputation for being sort of small and frail and weak, and of course she didn't make old bones.
Interesting there. You remember, to a king, having a male heir is kind of everything. It's like part of their, like, it's how they immortalize themselves, is to have this heir, have it keep going. Right, have the family line keep going.
That had not resulted in a male heir. Happy Henry wasn't so happy anymore. You still haven't given me a male heir. Well, how do you know it's my problem? Maybe it's your problem, Henry. It couldn't be my problem because I've been boinking half your maidstaff and one of them gave me a boy.
Boinking.
Sure.
This is what you always wonder. Kings, none of them are faithful. Yeah, it seems that way. But the boy has to be legitimate, right? For to be considered, I guess, a king. So that's why you have to be legally married, for that sort of thing.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe it's my problem. I'll look into that. Cardinal Wolsey, now Henry's Lord Chancellor, knew his job depended on keeping Henry happy. And so he said, well, if you can't be the great warrior, then how about the great peacemaker? Not as cool, but okay. And so the Field of the Cloth of Gold, a glamorous peace summit between England and France, was held.
They, at one point, the two kings literally had a wrestling match for who was stronger. Incidentally, Henry lost and was kind of mortified about it.
The King of France, Francis I, was essentially the French version of King Henry, and the whole thing was basically one giant codpiece measuring contest. The two sides did agree to a peace treaty. However, it didn't last long. You see, there was
England
a
and
third
France.
major player in European politics at the time, an exquisite specimen of royal inbreeding, an heir to a huge inheritance, and a chin
Habsburgs.
that could hit a home run. Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. He was Henry's wife.
Habsburgs. They have the notable chin. This family married into like every major royal family in all of Europe and had that distinguished big chin. They were known for marrying into their own family with all kinds of incestual issues, I guess, that come from it.
Yes, the famous Habsburg jaw. That deformity was a result of all the inbreeding, though, of course. Look at them. In the end, way after this period, they ended up looking like this. And having the wits and mentality of a small child. So, yeah, don't inbreed.
Wife's nephew. Henry had helped him out in the past to put down a Spanish rebellion, and now the two wanted to make an alliance, and so a marriage was arranged. Mary, I'd like to introduce you to your 22-year-old fully grown adult cousin, and now your future husband. Ew, he looks inbred. Mary! We're all inbred.
Yep, not uncommon. Inbred, they were so obsessed with bloodlines, and then, tainting your blood with any kind of impure blood could be seen as defiling. So, yeah, it's different times, huh?
Well, no, wait, that wasn't the case across the board. Oversimplified and Mr. Terry give the impression that every noble family was inbred. Not so.
Alliance, Charles and Henry agreed to team up and relaunch a campaign against France. In 1522, the English landed and stormed as far south as Agincourt, but Charles didn't commit significant forces. Whoops, sorry man, not sure what happened. I'll join in next year. The next year, England swept northern France, almost taking Paris. But once again, where was Charles? Oh man, I'm so sorry. I promise, next year, I'll be there. The next year,
he's all talk.
The fed-up Henry decided he was going to sit this one out. And just as Charles ravaged the French at the Battle of Pavia and captured the French king. Holy crap, dude. Yeah, I totally kicked France's butt. That's great. So, can I have the French throne like we agreed? No. What? And also, I don't want to marry your ugly daughter anymore.
He's using him.
Ugly? Have you seen your chin? Mummy says it's a strong chin for a strong boy. As Henry's alliance with Charles...
So he got screwed over.
Yeah, so that's a massive thing there. Spain taking large parts of Central and Western Europe. I'll expand upon that in a minute.
He's going to be resentful now, isn't he?
Fell apart. Henry knew his days as a warrior were over. This was a problem for Henry, but it was a bigger problem for his wife. Catherine of Aragon had two jobs. The first was to give Henry a male heir, but the second was to maintain an alliance with her relatives in Spain, including her nephew. She had failed, and Henry's sexy eyes began to wander. Home from all his wars, Henry ate up his daily 5,000 calories of meat as an infatuation began to grow for one of his wife's ladies-in-waiting, Anne Boleyn. Beautiful, intelligent, cultured. She was exactly Henry's type.
He's the other
now,
chick.
Henry had dozens of mistresses, including Anne's sister. But Anne didn't want to just be Henry's side chick. She wanted to be his queen.
She was
Henry
probably ambitious herself, right? A lot of people in that royal court that would love to be in positions of power, you know.
Probably ambitious? Yeah, she was ambitious.
He sent dozens of letters, thirsty love poems. In one, he proclaimed that he would like to kiss her pretty duckies, Henry's loins.
Mr. Terry looks a little nonplussed there. So just to be clear, because neither of them clarify, a bit too child-friendly or clean-cut to clarify, but duckies means tits. I, on the other hand, have no such qualms talking about it. I enjoy talking about knockers, if anything. Quick side note about Anne Boleyn's boobs then. She was famously quite flat-chested. I mean, lots of people commented on it at the time. There's a funny bit in the TV adaptation of Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall, where Thomas Cromwell, played by Academy Award winner Mark Rylance, is talking to Mary Boleyn, Anne's sister, played by the delightful Charity Wakefield, where she tells Cromwell about Henry's desire to kiss Anne's pretty duckies. It's sort of a famous line. And Cromwell says Henry would be lucky to find them.
Henry's loins were on fire, but Anne kept him at just the right distance to drive him crazy and push him to find a way to get rid of his current wife.
Gotta put a ring on
Wolsey,
it.
I want a divorce. And as the representative of the Pope here in England, I expect you to sort it out quickly and quietly. I don't want this to turn into a Europe-wide scandal. You got it, Your Majesty.
Wrong.
Hey, Big Papa! My boy Henry says he wants to divorce his wife. Any chance? To Henry's shock and horror, Wolsey deferred the case back to the Pope in Rome. To make matters worse, after all the wars in Europe, the Pope was currently under the thumb of Charles V. Now everybody knew what was going on, and Henry's divorce trial had become a pawn of greater European politics.
This is always something in my classes I've needed to clarify, because you set him up as Henry as having a good relationship with that with the Pope, and they haven't really talked about the whole possible threatening of the Reformation, which was breaking apart the church, that's happening at this time too. That was another reason why they had a good relationship there. But they I try to clarify. I always just kind of thought it was more doctrinal than anything. Just no, you're not above the laws of the church, because you don't, in Catholicism, you don't get a divorce. It's not something that's allowed. However, there had been instances, from what I understood, that of the Pope annulling a marriage. So it's not really saying like a divorce. An annulment means like a cancellation, like it never happened. But, and I believe popes had done that before. So I always wondered why this was a little bit different, because it's always political, right?
So the key thing here, which I don't think is stressed enough, is that the Pope was under the thumb of Spain, as Oversimplified puts it. That's the key thing. In Wolf Hall, again, there's a good bit where Thomas Cromwell's servant doesn't understand the implications of Spanish armies occupying Rome. And Mark Gatiss, as Stephen Gardiner, has to explain it means the Pope will never grant a divorce or an annulment while he's under the power of Spain.
For Wolsey, The decision was a disaster. His job was to keep Henry happy, and Henry was very, very unhappy. Nevertheless, the divorce trial began. Henry's case rested upon the Bible verse in Leviticus that claimed marrying your brother's widow would lead to childlessness, and Henry was certainly having a hard time getting a male heir. He argued that the Pope had got it wrong when he allowed Henry to marry his brother's widow, and that now divorce was the only solution.
That's a strong case. He's saying this marriage should never have happened because of biblical sources.
Is it a strong case, though? I'd argue, as many historians and even contemporaries did, that it's a remarkably weak case. It's Henry pretty transparently using any loophole or any line of scripture he possibly can to extricate himself from Catherine. She wasn't childless, he'd had special dispensation from Rome in the first instance, and he'd had no concerns on account of religion for over 20 years. It's a realpolitik thing, just doing whatever it takes to win. So on paper it might seem like a strong argument at first blush, but in fact it's pretty wafer thin.
Oh, sir. It's only a wafer thin.
However, the Pope and Charles V acquired some interesting letters from an unknown source. He wants to kiss her pretty duckies? Man, this guy's loins are on fire! The Pope now knew the case for divorce may not actually be found in Henry's Bible, but in Henry's pants. After escaping Charles V, the Pope did send out one Cardinal Campeggio to oversee the trial. Campeggio was an old man racked with gout. It took him 6 painful months to travel from Rome to England, and when he finally got there, this kept happening. Hey, I need you to take a look at this evidence. I can't. My gout is acting up. Hey, are you ready to take my testimony? I can't. My gout is acting up. Hey, can you please make a decision? I can't. Your gout is acting up. My gout is acting up. Anne Boleyn, with her Protestant views in support of the Reformation, suspected the Pope was just delaying.
I did not know Anne Boleyn was a Protestant. That's something I did not know. No wonder they're not approving this. She's not a Catholic.
Not quite sure how you don't know that, Mr. Terry. Okay, this is one of the only clangers I feel Mr. Terry makes, which is fair enough. He is being completely honest, which is totally admirable. And at the end, he says he learnt a lot, so fair play, fair play. But Anne Boleyn's Protestant leanings are really quite famous. I mean, it's kind of her whole deal, her raison d'etre. Her entire position at court relies upon it. Here's a quick montage from Showtime's The Tudors, showing Anne doing and saying fairly hardline Protestant stuff. Stuff that would get you burnt alive in Florence or Madrid. Henry here is played by a renowned douchebag, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, and Anne played by the stunningly beautiful, the exquisitely beautiful Natalie Dormer.
I've been summoned to Rome. I have to appear before the Pope and answer for myself. Can you imagine it? Me, the King of England, who answers to no authority but God! Damn Wolsey. Damn him to hell.
May I speak plainly?
Yes, of course.
There are some who on good authority care not for popes. These writers say that the king is both emperor and pope absolutely in his own kingdom.
Which writers?
I have a book to show you, with your permission.
Show it to me. Ha!
This belief that the Pope and the clergy possess separate power and authority is contrary to Scripture. The king is the representative of God on earth, and his law is God's law. The ruler is accountable to God alone, and the obedience of his subjects is an obedience required by God. For the Church and the Pope to rule the princes of Europe is not only a shame above all shames, but an inversion of the divine order. One king and one law in God's name in every realm. This book is a book for me, and for all kings.
And there are other books like it. Books which detail the abuses of power, privileges, the greed of the clergy in your Majesty's realm. Books which Wolsey deliberately kept hidden from you.
I should like to read them. Now that I've taken power unto myself, I shall work day and night if necessary to resolve things, including my annulment. I swear to you now, everything will be different.
Now you know the truth, you must act against him. He and his fellow priests and prelates think that they can control your Majesty's realm, that they are higher than you. And by taking instruction from the Pope, was not Wolsey acting as an agent of a foreign country? The presumption of the Pope, thinking he could tell you, what to do. Oh, my love. Just a little longer. And then...
Oh my god.
I am made head of the Church of England.
Is it true? Then I'm so glad. At last you have your right. And can do as you will. I will keep here a copy of Tyndale's English Bible. All of you are free to read it and draw spiritual nourishment from it. For the old days are gone.
Ooh, having a copy of Tyndale's English language Bible. Yeah, that's heresy right there, baby. Letting your servants read it at will, yeah, that'd get you executed in Europe for sure.
Everything has changed now. Thanks to His Majesty, you have all been delivered from the darkness and bondage of papal thraldom, idolatry, and superstition. This is a new beginning. For me, for you, and for England.
Oh, she's so pretty, it's distracting.
Hey, it's distracting!
Stop simping over Natalie Dormer. Yeah, I know, right? It's embarrassing.
2 whole years the trial dragged on, and in the end the Pope simply said, no divorce for you. Henry, the king that had previously defended the Pope militarily from France and intellectually from the reformist ideas of Martin Luther, who had once respected the Pope above all, now found the Pope standing between him and fourth base. Your Majesty, what will you do?
Base.
I'm the king, dum-dum. I can do whatever I want. What? For his failure, Henry removed Wolsey from the court, a decision that was likely influenced by Anne Boleyn, who disliked the cardinal. Having fallen from grace and with potential charges of treason over his head, Wolsey died of illness a year later.
Gout.
Then, Henry set about removing England from the influence of the Pope. Hey, if you do that, I'll excommunicate you. Who cares, man? Oh no, apathy. My weakness. Henry gathered theologians and scholars together to help him make his case against the Pope. Together, they argued to the people of England that the Pope's rule over the church was basically a takeover of what had once been a self-governing, national English church.
This is interesting. His evidence for all these things is far better marketed than I had ever thought. Going back to, we thought was the wrongful grounds of his original marriage even happening because it should have been against biblical law, and now for trying to justify his desire to be the head of the church in England, right, based on nationalism. And I'm sure these things for a lot of people would have sound very justified, but I know there were a lot of people that were very much they saw through this and saw that with what Henry was doing it was all about getting another male heir, which you could tell is not being what's marketed. Why the divorce? Why the takeover of the church? He's not doing that because he's trying to lift himself up and his case up on something else that might have more justifiable, means.
Mr. Terry making a good point there. He does appreciate that people saw through Henry's motivations, even at the time.
This moment may have laid the foundations for English Euroscepticism. That's right, Brexit may have been influenced by Henry's explosive loins. By and large, the people gave Henry their support, and those that didn't were going to be in for a rough time. But for now, Henry assumed the role.
It was, he was punishable by death because it was seen as treason if you didn't support this stuff. So a lot of very high people like Thomas More went to their deaths for this.
Of supreme head of the English Church, and his next divorce trial was a foregone conclusion. Catherine of Aragon was Aragon, and Anne Boleyn was in.
Okay, so just got to pause here to fill in a bunch of stuff neither of them mention. They're talking about the Act of Supremacy. That is an act of Parliament, or two acts actually, that legally made the monarch head of the Church of England. And yeah, if you were asked to formally sign it and refused, oh boy, you're in deep trouble. You're basically pitting your will against the king. That's not a good look if you want to keep on living. And some notable people did refuse to sign it, because it was also essentially asking you to renounce Catholicism in some important respects. Princess Mary had to be coerced into signing it, for example. And Thomas More. Mr. Terry mentioned Thomas More there. Brilliant, perfect. I'm surprised Oversimplified doesn't mention More at any point. I mean, I get it. It was obviously a deliberate editorial decision on their part, but he's a fairly key figure. So there are loads of characters around Henry that are worthy of mention, and Oversimplified couldn't address them all, especially in a 26-minute video. You know, there's Suffolk and Norfolk and Fisher and Audley and Cranmer. The list goes on. But More was Risley. More is actually important to the grander story. He famously refused to sign the Act of Supremacy when called upon to do so, and ended up on trial, and eventually his head separated from his body. There's a whole 1960s film about it, well, a play and then a film, A Man for All Seasons. Henry in that is played by the superb Robert Shaw. But in Wolf Hall, More is played by Anton Lesser. A masterful performance, in my opinion. You really must see Lesser's More. Anyway, he martyred himself, refusing to turn his back on 1,000 years of papal tradition. And they lopped his head off for it. I'm dwelling on this a little bit because it really is a crucial point in Henry's reign. It's him saying, if you don't respect my authority, I will end you. It doesn't matter even if you're Thomas More. Because More was among the most famous men in Europe. Guys like More and Erasmus and Luther were the leading minds of their age. So this is Henry stamping his authority over the kingdom. That's what he's most noted for, really.
Alright, I've upended the entire country to be with you, so you'd better give me a son, okay? Now, did you get my letter about the duckies? Having finally married the girl of his dreams, it was party time for Henry. And what a party. Life in the Tudor court was non-stop.
Some DDR
huge
down
banquets, with each person eating on average 5,000 calories a day. And no vegetables. Those are for poor people. Rich people ate meat. And so you know what else is for rich people? Constipation. But don't let that stop the party. The toilets are communal. And Henry himself was the center of everything.
You ever thought about how gross, medieval toilets were?
He ate the best food. He had 1,200 pairs of shoes. He didn't even have to wipe his own bum-bum. Life was great. Everyone, I give you your majesty, King Henry VIII. But how did they pay for it all? Well, influenced by his fairly Protestant new wife. Since Henry had overturned the organization of the church, this is how they paid for it. Oh my goodness, how awful. Selling fake fragments of the cross? Vials of Jesus' blood that you got from a duck? Using religion in this way? This is terrible. I must confiscate all this money at once.
A lot of this stuff was things that early Protestants were objective of the church of anyways, was these like so-called relics that would be used to basically scam people out of money because they were said to be, something important in religious history and didn't have a lot of evidence for that. So he's kind of piggybacking almost on the Protestant movement here. Now, I'm going back 5 seconds here, but you can see already what's happening here as a devout Catholic. He's starting to get away from some of that with its origins and, of course, simply wanting his own heir. Because from what I understand, too, when the Anglican Church, as it's going to be called, was very similar to the Catholic Church in a lot of ways, far more than a lot of other Protestant churches.
Ooh, a lot to unpack there. So Oversimplified is talking broadly about the dissolution of the monasteries and really the whole English Reformation, and unleashing Thomas Cromwell to appropriate much of the land and wealth of the Catholic monasteries. Relics and indulgences all wrapped up as part of that. But I must take issue with what Mr. Terry said there about the fledgling Anglican Church and how similar, or not, it was from the Catholic Church at the time. I only take issue with it to say that Mr. Terry gives the impression that the two faiths were pretty similar, but from a certain point of view, you could say that they were fundamentally dissimilar.
A certain point of view?
I mean, to us, the doctrinal differences may seem slight. You know, the sacrament being the blood and body of Christ, or the nature of purgatory, for example. But to some of the people at the time, this was radically new stuff, radically different to what they'd grown up with, you know. It was asking them to turn their whole notion of the cosmos on its head. It's no small thing. And anyway, historians have argued about this ever since. So I just wanted to add a spot of nuance there to what Mr. Terry had said. Okay, let's go on.
This way? This is terrible. I must confiscate all this money at once. Yes, how awful. I must take all of this away immediately. Monasteries across the nation were dissolved and their riches placed in the royal coffers. Obviously, many people weren't too happy about this, but Henry had a plan for that as well. Henry's descent into tyranny had begun, as any who rejected his new claim as supreme head of the English church found their heads on the chopping block. And so Henry partied. He danced, he sang, he ate, he jousted.
Doing all the stuff he wanted to.
Be me. Love blood.
The opposite of his education.
Widows. In 1536, Henry fell from his horse in a jousting accident. Not for the first time, but certainly the heaviest fall he had taken yet. Some historians believe the brain damage caused by the incident may have violently accelerated Henry's descent into tyranny.
It could happen. TBI, traumatic brain injury, can change the way people think. They become more irritable and stuff like that because your brain can't process the same way it used to. So it defends itself with being more angry, malicious, and paranoid to basically protect itself.
It's extremely difficult to make any kind of medical diagnosis for historical figures, and we really don't know if what Oversimplified said there is true or not. But, I mean, it is true what Mr. Terry said, that some types of brain injury make people massively more violent than they were before. There's even examples of that among serial killers, Fred West and John Wayne Gacy, to name but two.
Executions in England ramped up. During his reign, it's estimated 57 to 72,000 people were put to death.
That seems unrealistically high to me. I'm not saying Oversimplified is wrong. I've just never seen those figures before. I'd genuinely be interested to know what source they used for that info, actually.
Rich or poor, big or small, no one was safe. And the most prominent victim of all was to be Henry's own wife. It had been 3 years since their marriage. Anne had been pregnant 4 times, yet she had only been able to produce one healthy child, a girl. What's more, it's possible...
Now...
Right, everything Mr. Terry is about to say is totally spot on. I couldn't have put it better myself. I could dig out an apt quote or some figures to back it up, but I'll just let Mr. Terry do his thing.
One thing, though, is it was far more common in those days to lose children than it is now. Now it's very rare to actually lose your child in childbirth or early in infancy. And it has a lot to do with the medical advances that came throughout the Industrial Revolution, starting with just having more food produced. So women were healthier, and a healthier woman's going to have more likelihood for a stronger child that can survive that. So losing children in infancy or in childbirth was very common.
She had been going around insulting Henry's manhood.
Oh no.
Henry's eyes, once again, began to wander. His new top man, Thomas Cromwell, didn't want to end up like Cardinal Wolsey, and so he came up with a plan. There was a court musician who had been quite flirtatious in public with the Queen. Well, Thomas Cromwell and his boys got a forced confession out of him, saying that it didn't stop at innocent flirtation, and the charges came rolling in. Listen, Anne,
torture?
We need to talk.
The downfall of Anne Boleyn. So much has been written and said about this, but I think I'll let Hilary Mantel herself say a few words.
The way Anne's story ended up, no one could have dreamt or predicted. She had always been a flirt. She was a highly attractive woman whose sexuality had seen her through her life and taken her to the position of Queen of England. But you might think that by the time she and Henry got into bed together, the effort had exhausted them both, and there are signs of things going wrong from the early days. They were together in the end only for 3 years, and during that time they quarrel, they make up, they quarrel, they make up. Henry is looking to Anne to give him the son that he says she has promised him, the son to succeed him, to secure England, make England safe from civil war. Anne has 3 pregnancies that we know about. The first results in a daughter. They don't know at the time that this will be Queen Elizabeth, one of the greatest monarchs in English history. They just think, oh, a girl, what use is a girl to us? There are 2 more pregnancies, there are 2 miscarriages. Anne has broken her promise, according to Henry. And he's bored and he's beginning to look at other women. And she won't accept that as the former queen did. She's jealous, she's angry. And also her confidence is waning. And she seeks to restore her confidence by relationships with other men. We don't know how far those relationships were. Henry said at one point before her death that he thought she'd committed adultery with 100 men. Obviously, she may not have committed adultery with anyone at all, but 5 men were accused with her. 5 men died because of it. One of them was her own brother, who was accused of illicit relations with her. It's impossible to be sure at this point whether Anne was guilty at all, but the point was that she, at certain points, gave the impression of a woman who was guilty, even if not guilty as charged.
Oh no, you're gonna divorce me, aren't you? Just like your last wife. Aw, no, come here, shh, no. I'm not gonna divorce you. It's much worse than that. Anne was charged with adultery, perversion, even incest, and plotting to kill the king himself. The jury found her guilty, including her own uncle and ex-fiancé,
the Duke of Norfolk and Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland,
both fearing the wrath of the king. And on May 19th, 1536,
charge of all the things that you know Henry did on a frequent basis,
Anne Boleyn was Anne Boleyn. Literally the next day, Henry married one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting, Jane Seymour, his 3rd wife.
Aha! Pretty much the only factual error Oversimplified makes, and even then I've got to be quite pedantic to pick them up on it. It's just one word, but Henry was only betrothed to Jane Seymour on the next day. They didn't actually marry for another 10 days or so. But the point is still completely valid. It was uncomfortably soon after the execution.
After Anne had smack-talked his manhood, and since he still had no male heir, Henry went on a campaign to ensure the public knew he was as virile as it gets. He had this famous portrait painted of the manliest man I've ever seen,
one.
And later,
Hans Holbein the Younger.
Mr. Holbein is indeed a genius.
he would even have his physician
You go down further and he's got these nice skinny legs, right? But the nice, powerful, well-fed, powerful gut.
make a declaration about his health. King Henry is a fine specimen of a man, and please don't make me say this. Say it. And every time I look at him, I wish I was a woman. The truth is, after his jousting accident, the king had badly injured his leg and was no longer very active, yet he was still eating his daily 5,000 calories. So by now, Henry was extremely unhealthy. For the remainder of his life, he would incur a number of illnesses, and his injured leg ulcers would ooze stinking pus. A fine specimen of a man indeed. On the church front, Henry's new and now pregnant wife was a devout Catholic, and she pleaded with the king to reinstate the monasteries. Henry was sick of wives meddling in his business, and he bluntly warned her to remember what happened to Anne Boleyn.
You wonder where his theological beliefs are at this time, or does he not even care? You know, you got like a more Protestant wife, then a more Catholic wife. I mean, it seems like none of that matters to him anyways, but it'd be interesting.
Since splitting with the Pope, Henry had been hard at work determining the theology of his new Church of England.
Here we go.
It kept many Catholic traditions, while on the other hand embracing some reformist ideas, such as requiring the use of a new Bible not in Latin, but in English. The cover of Henry's new Bible depicted the people appearing to worship a giant King Henry. And in the corner, there's some people being put to death, just for good measure. For any who opposed Henry's ideas...
That's quite the cover. Holy cow, I did not know it looked like that. That just sums him up, like his whole reign on the cover of the Bible.
Whether Catholic or Protestant, for any who rebelled against him, it would be off with their heads.
Henry was mercurial. You know, he'd change his mind about even huge things, suddenly and without telling anyone. Certainly he was like that in later life. It was difficult to know where you stood with him or what mood he might be in. So he constantly kept people guessing. You know, like one day he'd say stuff that was pretty ultra-Protestant, and then the very next day punish someone for saying the same sorts of things. So he was a dangerous, dangerous character.
In October 1537, Henry finally got what he had been waiting for. His wife Jane gave birth to a healthy boy.
Yeah.
However, the triumph soon turned to tragedy, as Jane Seymour died days later from complications during the birth. Henry mourned Jane, the woman who had given him a son, for 2 years.
Really?
Your Majesty, it's time to choose your next wife. Thomas! Not now! Can't you see I'm in mourning? That one. The woman Thomas Cromwell had lined up for Henry's next marriage
Hans
was the
Holbein
sister of
again.
a powerful
Hans Holbein
German
younger.
duke. But all Henry cared about was that she was pretty as pie. And Thomas Cromwell promised that indeed she was. How?
You'd wonder if these women, like, because of the history, right? That they would be, like, scared to death to be his husband. You'd think so, right?
Yeah, Henry had a reputation already, for sure.
However, when she arrived in England, Henry was less than pleased. Your Majesty, let me introduce you to your fourth wife, Anne of Cleves. What's that smell? I think it's your legs, sire. No, it's Anne of Cleves. She's ugly.
So Anne of Cleves was supposed to have been ugly. And that painting by Hans Holbein the Younger is meant to have been hugely flattering, basically not really looking anything like her. Funny actually, in the Showtime version of The Tudors, they cast Joss Stone as Anne of Cleves. I think it's a bit unfair. I mean, Joss Stone is no Natalie Dormer, but she's quite obviously, you know, at a glance attractive. No? I mean, I just thought they should have cast someone a bit more homely. Anyway.
This is treason.
Oh, mean.
What? Off with his head. Henry found his new wife so repulsive that he never consummated the marriage and divorced her just 6 months later. And for bringing Henry an ugly, stinky woman, along with additional charges of plotting treason, Thomas Cromwell lost his head.
There's quite a lot more to it than that. You know, all stuff mixed up with the Reformation and the dissolution of the monasteries and rebellions and uprisings in different parts of the country, etc. But I get it that Oversimplified can only go into so much detail.
The very same day
Bye,
of Cromwell's
Cromwell.
execution, Henry married his fifth wife, the famed beauty Catherine Howard. She's believed to have only been 17 at the time. Henry was 49. And like Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard didn't last long. You see, for some reason, she may not have been entirely satisfied with her 49-year-old fine specimen of a man. And it's possible she engaged in a number of extramarital affairs, including one with her cousin, Thomas Culpeper. When Henry found out, he was devastated. How could she do this to me?
You're
But,
gross,
sire,
dude.
Don't you have hundreds of mistresses? Shut up, Barry. That's not the point.
So true.
Your Majesty, you're crying. I'm not crying. It's just that sometimes, when I get sad, water comes out of my eyes. For her treason, Catherine
Not
Howard
crying,
met
you're
the
crying.
same fate as Anne Boleyn in 1542.
Now, just quickly on Catherine Howard, it's my opinion that this girl was completely and utterly out of her depth, crazily out of her depth. It seems she had no real idea what kind of game she'd found herself mixed up in. That's how it seems to me. Her indiscretions, so to speak, were pretty mad. It's like she thought she could get away with anything. When she was executed, she even declared her love for Culpeper in her final words to the crowd. That's nuts. That's kind of unheard of. It's a bit like spitting in the face of God or something. I mean, I find her behaviour strange.
So, we've had divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, look out, here comes survived. Henry married the daughter of a royal official, Catherine Parr, in 1543, and she appears to have been a good companion to Henry. She cared for the aging king, who by now was so heavy it took several men to winch him onto his horse.
Quick note then about medieval winches being used to get knights up on horseback. Most historians just poo-poo that idea entirely and say, oh, that's just made up for novels and for films. So serious historians don't think that ever happened. But I think actually in the case of Henry VIII, it might be one of the only exceptions. When he was in, late stage Henry VIII, he was so massive that I think there are actual accounts from the time that do say there was some kind of contraption to help him get on horseback.
She acted as a mediator within the family and convinced the king to restore his two daughters to the line of succession. Their marriage did have one hiccup, however, when Catherine dared disagree with the king over the subject of theology. It's a miracle because when the priest says the words of institution, the bread turns into the body of Christ. Well, if you put the bread in a box for 3 months, is it a miracle that it turns moldy? Treason! You can't just call everything treason, Henry. The king called for her arrest, as serious charges were placed over her head. However, in the end, she told Henry that she had not been disagreeing with him, but simply learning from him. And so when the guards came to arrest her, the king told them to make like an Anne and cleave. Catherine Parr stayed with Henry right until the end. As he aged into his later years, in increasing pain and ill health, he grew ever more suspicious and moody.
Catherine Parr was something of a nurse for him by this stage.
The once generous, promising young king was now feared by all around him. Sigmund, I don't have much longer. Hold me. Of course, sire. Do you have any final wishes? How about one last conquest in France? And so in 1544, Henry made for Calais. The pesky French had been supporting the Scottish in their ongoing wars with England, and they also owed Henry some money. So the extremely unhealthy king personally led a siege against the French city of Boulogne. The English dug tunnels under the castle, and on the 13th of September, the French surrendered. A glorious victory for Henry. In actuality, the whole misadventure nearly bankrupted England, and they ended up giving Boulogne back to the French a few years later.
Yeah, it's pointless.
Don't tell Henry. He's having his moment. Finally.
So many of these things are just to have it on your resume, right? Or your legacy. Yeah, you've defeated them, but we all know holding on to an empire is far more difficult than conquering one.
So here's a quote about Boulogne from the book This Sceptred Isle by Christopher Lee. No, not that Christopher Lee. And he says, quote, Henry captured Boulogne. The emperor, his supposed ally, was at the same time making a separate treaty with King Francis. The outcome for Henry was a treaty of sorts which allowed Boulogne to remain English for 8 years, but then to be handed back, complete with new fortifications. The cost of this war to England was enormous. At the same time, everything was going wrong for Henry in Scotland. Raids by English forces, and in particular the attack on Edinburgh by the English, united the Scots against Henry. So now Henry had exactly what he'd tried so hard to avoid, war with Scotland and France at the same time. Lee then quotes a bit directly from Churchill, and so Churchill wrote about that. Without a single ally, the nation faced the possibility of invasion from both France and Scotland. The crisis called for unexpected sacrifices from the English people. Never had they been called upon to pay so many loans, subsidies, and benevolences. At Portsmouth, he, Henry, prepared for the threatened invasion in person. A French fleet penetrated the Solent and landed troops in the Isle of Wight, but they were soon driven off, and the crisis gradually passed. End quote.
In 1547, a 55-year-old Henry, lapsing in and out of consciousness, passed away. His son, Edward, succeeded him, but died just 5 years later. His daughter, Mary, briefly took the reins and steered the country back towards the Pope. But then his second daughter embraced reformist ideas and gradually transformed England into a Protestant country.
Again, nearly everything Mr. T is about to say is completely perfectly spot on.
This was a really interesting thing that we talk about in my classes is the kind of roller coaster that religiously England went after Henry died. Because he was, somewhere, a lot of policies kind of in the middle between Catholicism and Protestantism. And then you have them shift more to Protestantism. And then when they go to Mary, who is infamous as a staunch Catholic, by the way, she's where you get the whole Bloody Mary thing, because a lot of Protestants were killed because of her. So she had this, especially if you're Protestant, this very bad aura about her. And then, yeah, I see with Elizabeth, they start to find more of a middle ground, some more compromise between the different sides religiously in England.
Spot on. Apart from that last bit, not sure compromise is really the best word to use there. It's messy and complicated, and many people that found themselves murdered or executed or exiled or ostracised might not have thought a great amount of compromise was going on. But then again, this is a topic which is hotly debated among historians. It's possible to argue convincingly one way or the other.
Henry's desperation to marry Anne Boleyn and his resulting feud with the Pope had changed the course of English history and religion forever. Unfortunately, none of Henry's children had heirs, and when Elizabeth I died, Henry's lineage ended, with the House of Stuart replacing the House of Tudor. So then you might think, all that effort, a life filled with so much frustration, yet he never conquered France, he barely had a male heir, and his lineage died out.
Barely had a male heir? I don't know about that. That's just a bit of an odd thing to say. Edward was fairly sickly, but he existed. He lived to be 15. He was King of England for 6 years. You can't really say Henry barely had a male heir. He just did. He totally had a male heir.
The egotistical man Henry grew sick and cruel, and then died. So why are we all so fascinated with King Henry VIII? Why not Henry II or IV? Well, without mentioning the many important things his reign did achieve, one of his biggest goals was to go down in history, and you can put a big green check beside that one, because everything he did and how he asserted his control and authority over everyone around him has come to be viewed as the epitome of the word king. And also because of the wife killings? Yeah, definitely the wife killings.
Of course. I mean, when you look at the indirect effect that is happening here, with the religious future of Henry, that has had a big impact, especially with how his successors kind of did the tug of war thing with England there. So I mean, he is a fascinating figure. I think we're good, right? Hold the funky tune. Keep going. They have posters. That's cool. All right, cool. All right, so great video once again, very funny, super informative. That was honestly one of the most educational oversimplifieds for me personally that I have watched.
Yeah, got to give it to Oversimplified. They make great content. I'll just let Mr. Terry do his conclusions and wrap up in full. It's pretty solid, pretty honest.
A lot of them, you know, I knew some of the stuff and stuff like that, and I was able to add. I didn't feel like I was able to add as much as specific about Henry at this time, just because I was learning a lot of new things. A lot of stuff I'll be able to add to my teaching, specifically as justifications that he used, that he kind of marketed towards his divorce, and the Act of Supremacy passing, which was pretty much the legislation that said the King of England is also going to be the head of the religion, with that sort of thing. And then yeah, the different wives, how the story for each of them, I got to see a little bit more detail. So this was really actually educational for me. I mean, creating the humor, you know, also behind it, which of course is what they do, and helps stick it there. And I love what this channel does for casual people that are more casually into history. It's a great middle ground, you know, between just being again more comedic, but then also educational. It's great, and you know, and they deserve all of the credit that they get for how many views they get. I see, you know, every time they post one of these videos, it is like #1 trending. You know, it gets millions of views in the first few days, which is awesome. I just love seeing historically themed stuff on the forefront of the biggest digital media platform in history, which is with YouTube. I love that. It gives me so much confidence that history is still very much alive, and the new way that it's being taught through these amazing content creators is just so gratifying to see that. And
I agree with Mr. Terry.
And if you're watching this video and if you watched all the way to the end, I appreciate you for just being somebody that obviously is appreciating history. And I hope that you can spread that passion, whatever level that is, to others, and we can make the internet a great place for it, because it's the best tool that we've ever had. So awesome. Learned a lot of things, a lot of fun. I really think he's got the format down for these and the running jokes and all that. It hits, and the craft is there, and I just hope he can keep being supported. Please support this channel. Okay. If you are feeling like, giving financially to like my channel, think about these, a lot of these content creators like Oversimplified. If they can help them create this awesome content, then I think that's first and foremost the thing that we need to do. So looks like they got a lot of ways you can support through probably Patreon and their own merchandise and stuff like that. So that's very cool. But I will go ahead and plug one more time. If you want to support our channel, the new Teespring campaign is up, as well as my old just Mr. Terry Aztec design one that is up there if you feel like doing that. Also, it's a Patreon account that I have. If you want to support, one thing the patrons get from my channel is the ability to vote on videos that I feature about once a week. So that's a way you can do that. But thank you to everyone that's been supporting the channel in all types of different ways. There's channel memberships and just being a sub and super chats and all that. I really do appreciate that. But like I said just a couple minutes ago, thank you for just being a part of the history community, and simply by watching videos, that is playing a role in that. So thank you so much for that. All right, and with that, we'll go ahead and end it here, and I hope to see you very soon. Thanks for being for liking the video, for subbing. Join our Discord server down in the description, and hope to see you again very soon. Bye.
So yeah, I too will put all the links in my description, as well as my own Patreon and subscribe star and things. So yeah, if you like this reaction and this content, please do like and subscribe and share on social media and all that jazz. It's greatly appreciated. Alright, until next time then, I'll let Noel serenade us out. And why not go ahead and set that to some pictures of the otherworldly Natalie Dormer? What? I fancy Natalie Dormer. Who doesn't? Who doesn't?
And all the roads we have to walk are winding, and all the lights that light the way are blinding, they're blinding. There are many songs that I would like to sing to you, but I don't know how. I said I don't know how, and I said maybe are you gonna be the one who saves me? And after all, you're my wonderwall. And I said maybe you're gonna be the one that saves me. And after all, you're my wonderwall. And I said maybe you're gonna be the one that saves me. You're gonna be the one that saves me. You're gonna be the one that saves me. Thank you very much.